So, welcome once again to the economics of sex and drugs and other public issues, starting today with crime. Some important instructions. You'll have an online video every week, which is the course lecture. This is where you receive the course content and you should treat it in the same way that you treat any other lecture. So take good notes, like you always do. Now, the slides are given to you, so you don't need to copy down everything. Instead, you must summarize the slide in one sentence using your own words. This will help your learning a lot since you'll get to digest the material. So you record the slide number on the top left corner, then write the theme of that slide in one sentence in your own words. Your notes will be part of your participation and you'll get to show them to me later to impress me. So make sure your notes are complete. And whenever you're told to pause or to write down your own example, take it to heart. The advantage of these videos is that you have more liberty and autonomy. You can go at your own pace, you can pause and rewind if you want, and they are always available to you. There are also questions which pop up every 3 minutes to make sure you're on the right track and give you immediate feedback. This way I can also see if you're following along. If you watch it on YouTube, then enable the subtitles. That will help your comprehension. But you must still do the questions on Moodle. Let's go. Our society is infested with crime. This is the overarching theme of the lesson, and you should be able to analyze it through 4 guiding questions. What incentives explain the existence of this issue? What would be a top-down paternalistic response to it? What are some unintended consequences of it? And what is a bottom-up market-driven alternative? This is how every lesson starts, so you must pause and write down your answer to these questions. Now, you haven't done the lesson, so your answers will be a mess, but that's okay. The point here is not to get it right. It's meant to get you thinking, and then we'll come back to it at the end of the lesson. This way you can see your own learning, which is very rewarding. So record the slide number and the statement, and then write your answer to these main ideas. It's okay to guess at this point, and if you have no idea whatsoever about some of these terms, then you can look them up. All right, so pause here and write down. You don't need to recopy the questions, the 4 questions, but write your answers. Any social science, including economics, assumes that human behavior is rational. This doesn't mean that they're Einsteins, that they do fancy calculations in their mind. All it means is that there is some pattern to human behavior, that it is predictable, that people don't make the same mistake over and over again, but learn quickly from it. Duh, it should be common sense. That's intuitive because errors are costly, so people have the incentive to avoid them. And there are 2 conditions for this predictability. We are talking about the society at large and in the long run. So this is best summarized by a quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln, which I really love. So when we talk about probabilities, it doesn't mean that people consciously calculate all of them in their mind, but they behave in a way that can be modeled by consistent patterns, including formulas and equations. So I want to emphasize this element of predictability. People maximize their perceived utility based on predictable patterns. And I really want you to absorb this from the get-go, that using mathematical models can still be realistic as long as they do a good job in predicting human behavior. And this can be very empowering and even liberating realization. When you see 2 societies or 2 cultures behaving differently, it's not because of some intrinsic difference between them. It's not because one of them is wicked and the other is virtuous. Let's suspend our moral judgments and remember that both behaviors are rational developments according to the incentives they face in their circumstances. It's rather based on the expected benefits versus the expected costs in each society. So pause here, record the slide number, and summarize the content of the slide in one sentence using your own words. There are 2 types of statements. Positive statements are about how things are or aren't, as opposed to how things ought to be. It's about fact versus values, descriptive versus prescriptive. So let me clarify something. Positive here doesn't have a positive connotation. It doesn't mean true. It means it can be true or false. It's about the format of this statement. It's something that can be proven or disproven by evidence, as opposed to a personal opinion, which is subjective. Now, which type of statement do you think can have more consensus, and where do you get more controversy? right? So it's going to have to do with how easy it is to verify each, right? So I would ask you to write an example for each of them for yourself. So for positive statement, my example is like the inflation rate is X%, and X could be anything, because that's something that you can go, it's a factual statement. But if you say the inflation rate is too high, that's a normative statement, right? And because normative statements are prone to so much controversy and subjective, we try to focus more on positive statements in economics. So pause here and write your own example. Which of the following do you consider to be moral and which one's immoral? If you don't know what is necrophilia, look it up, but it's kind of gross. Oh no. All of them are controversial depending on context and culture. Even murder, if it's self-defense or if it's in war, then most people accept it. The idea of positive economics is that instead of spending our limited time and resources where there is no end to the dispute, let's focus instead on something measurable and pragmatic. People in general have good intentions, policies too, but that's not enough. We must look at the results. It's not enough to say that this policy is intended to fight crime or drugs. We must look at what actually comes out of it. Otherwise, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So economists have the same values as other people. That's not the difference. But they focus more on how to achieve those values. What are the most effective means towards those noble intentions? That's why the highest virtue in economics is efficiency. So pause here, record the slide number, and summarize it in one sentence in your own words. Would you like if our society moved toward having no murder? Your first reaction to any action or any idea should be, at what expense? Because we'll have to draw resources away from other social programs such as defense, education, healthcare, and maintaining infrastructure. So this is a very important slide and the gist of the lesson, that the optimal level of crime is not zero, and you should be able to prove it. If you want to have a zero crime, we'll get something like George Orwell's 1984. That's neither possible nor even desirable. What if something is beneficial, but it comes at the expense of our freedom? This is a nice proverb about how perfectionism is not such a smart idea. If the best or better is too idealistic, by aiming at it, we miss the available good. So let me emphasize once again the kind of sensitivity you want to develop as you go through this course. So pause here, record the slide number, and summarize this slide using your own words in one sentence. Wow, that was cool. All right, we want to see how crime prevention works and why the optimal level of crime is not zero. So first of all, I want you to copy this table down in your notes with the same kind of labels, and we're going to fill it together. So pause here and copy down the table. And here what I mean by police is really crime prevention. So one police means one unit of crime prevention, including not only the police officer, but also their equipment, their car, their jail facilities, and so on. So when there is no police officer, when we are not preventing crime at all, well, the total benefit of that is zero, obviously. Once we hire one police officer, the benefit is a lot because one police can do a lot in terms of preventing the most heinous crimes. A second police is more beneficial, but not as much as the first. So it's not doubling. And the third one, again, increases the benefit, but not tripling. And the whole idea here is that the first crimes to be prevented are more valuable in terms of their prevention as opposed to the later ones. So that's why the numbers are not linear. All right. Now the next part is we want to look at the marginal values. So first of all, we have to decide what the word marginal means. Marginal means moving from one step to the next. It means incremental. It's not the total value so far, but just the last step. It's the contribution of the last unit. And that is the same as derivative in calculus if you have done it. So this is a super important concept that I want to emphasize. So in the first step, we want to look at what is the marginal benefit of the first police. That would be the benefit of reducing crime by 1 unit. All right. So that's when we move from 0 to 1, the benefit is from 0 to 100. So that's going to be 100. The marginal benefit of the second police officer is when we move from 1 to 2, and that's from 100 to 160. So the difference is 60. And so on. You can find the rest of the values of the marginal benefits by going step by step. It's always about one step at a time and finding the distance between the two. And the cost here is the cost that it takes to hire those police officers with all their equipment. Yeah, nice job, guys. So when you have no police officer, well, the cost is 0. If you have 1, the cost, let's say, is 10. I'm making up these numbers in a way that is simple, but it just illustrates the logic and the way it works. If you have 2 officers, it would be 30, and then 3 would be 60, and so forth. Again, the numbers go up a little bit exponentially because the more resources we allocate to anything, the more scarce they become, and they become more and more expensive. So the sacrifice becomes increasingly greater as we allocate more resources to crime prevention. Now, can you guess what is marginal cost given the definition of marginal benefit? So again, we are looking at going from 0 to 1 or 1 to 2 each time, one step at a time. So marginal cost would be the cost of reducing crime by 1 more unit. So in the first step, the cost of that 1 unit of reduction is 10. And in the second step, the cost is going from 1 to 2. So from 10 to 30, that is 20. And so forth. You can find the marginal cost of the third step and all the way to the end. So here we have the full table, and now notice something, that as we stop crime, the benefit of each additional activity, crime prevention activity, decreases, right? But the cost of it, the marginal cost of it for each unit, for each additional crime prevention, increases, right? So what it means is that crime prevention becomes increasingly more costly and less beneficial. So there's going to be that point of equilibrium where things level off. And if you look at the table, you can tell where it is. It is when the marginal benefit and marginal cost equal. That is the optimal level of crime prevention. Now you might be like, hang on, why not have 5 cops? Isn't it beneficial? Of course it is. It gives us 30 benefit. But the thing is, at what expense? It's not economically justifiable. So you should always ask, at what expense am I getting this benefit? That's the real question. So it's not beneficial to make that additional investment, and the optimal level of police officers that we would have in this scenario would be 4. So pause here, complete your table, and make sure you take some good notes on this slide. All right, now you guys are like, oh no, this course is getting so hard already. What a mess. So let me give you a recap of the important things here. So it's not about the numbers, it's about understanding the logic behind it. So just to recap, we should invest in preventing crime as long as it gives us more benefit than cost, and stop when the cost level up to benefits. So this is a useful formula. Whenever marginal benefit equals marginal cost, that's like the optimal condition. Increasing marginal cost is another concept, that the crime prevention becomes increasingly more expensive since we have to sacrifice more crucial alternatives. So that would be the opportunity cost. It's kind of like having overprotective parents, right? And then another thing from the last slide is diminishing marginal returns. Again, a very useful concept that you're going to see again. The idea is that the benefit of preventing murder and rape is much greater than the benefit of preventing swearing or littering. In other words, the first crimes to be stopped give us much more benefit than the last crimes to be stopped. It's not as critical to stop minor offenses. As we prevent more and more crimes, we'll get to smaller and smaller offenses. Then the benefit of each additional prevention will get smaller and smaller. So record the slide number and summarize it in one sentence using your own words. Something is good or beneficial. Something is bad or harmful. So what? Whenever you hear someone make an affirmative statement, your first reaction should be, at what expense? And whenever someone makes a negative statement criticizing something, your first reaction should be, what is your alternative? Otherwise, these statements have absolutely no practical significance. Someone gives you a book and says, this is a very useful book, and you trust them. You know they're right. But does it mean that you should read the book? What if you have higher priorities? Then you would be like, oh no, what have I done? This comes from our sensitivity about the reality of opportunity cost. There is always a sacrifice. The free lunch fallacy is thinking that we can get something out of nothing. It's not enough to say that something is important or beneficial. It must be the best relative option among the choices available to us. Even if that option isn't good, if it's the lesser of two evils, we should stick to it because the alternative is even worse. This is a super important slide. I want this to be your takeaway from the course, sensitivity about expenses and alternatives. Because what you see all the time in the media and politics is that something is beneficial, so we should do it, or something is harmful, so we should leave it. Sorry, but being beneficial or harmful is not enough to draw any conclusion. Write down this sentence. In a world of limitation, sacrifice is inevitable. In a world of limitation, sacrifice is inevitable. And also, a very cool quote by Thomas Sowell, one of my favorite heroes, a nice economist. There are no solutions, only trade-offs. This means a shift of paradigm because focusing on gains can be misleading since it often leaves out the hidden costs and we lose track of the indirect sacrifices. Instead, you should look at the losses involved in any decision that we make. So always ask yourself, what am I losing here? Don't ask, what am I gaining here? That's the shift of focus that I want you to take out. So your intuitive response to any statement or scenario from now on should be, at what expense and what is your alternative? And also write down Thomas Sowell's quote. Did you see that? It was crushed. We looked at crime from the society's perspective. Let's look at the criminal's choice. Criminal behavior is also rational. So here's a simple formula which applies to practically every decision. Even if someone is really impulsive or insane, still in their own eyes, they think what they're doing is beneficial. So it's a very simple, universal, and useful way of unpacking human behavior. Now, a person may seek a wide range of benefits through crime, such as, oh, that's so cool, and there are a number of costs to crime. Now, I'm giving you a list of examples here. So what I want you to do is think of other examples of benefits and costs to crime. Not just material, but also psychological. And all this is probabilistic. So we're going to use a generic formula called expected value, which is probability times the outcome of something. And this applies to everything. So criminal behavior is absolutely no different from any other human behavior. This analysis is applicable to everyone and every choice. Of course, remember the two conditions, society at large and in the long run. So exceptions aside. This is the power of rational choice theory. And the criminal's decision will depend on two things given this formula, the likelihood of gain or loss and the size of gain or loss. In other words, if the punishments are more severe, or if there are more cops or cameras, then it deters the criminal behavior. And the studies also support that. But sometimes one crime is reduced at the expense of more of another crime in another area. So pause here, write down the formula, and take some notes for yourself. And I would say write some examples of benefits and costs of crime of your own. Can you put a price on your life? The answer is you're already doing it every day. When you eat or drink, there is a chance that you may choke on it and die, but you take the chance. And you might be like, hang on, I would die if I don't eat and drink. Look, you eat and drink beyond your survival needs. And what about crossing the street? Anytime you exit your home, there is a chance that you may have an accident. We are constantly gambling our life and the life of our loved ones. So it's not like economics is so materialistic and heartless that it quantifies everything and puts a price on human life. Everyone's already doing it. We just come up with a model for it. Economics is a description of human behavior. And the way it's done is through the willingness to pay by the households and the willingness to accept by the workers in order to expose themselves to more danger. And these are not based on hypothetical questions like how much would you pay if, but on how much people actually pay or actually receive, such as the price difference between homes near hazardous sites and others, or when they choose a less safe option because it's cheaper, or the salary difference for more dangerous jobs. And of course, the choice shouldn't be due to budget constraint. And you might be like, hang on, everyone's answer would be different to these questions. Sure, the price may be different, but everyone puts some price on their life. There is always a limit. It's not infinite. Human life is not infinite. It shows that we care not only about the length of our life, but also about the quality of our life. So we're willing to save on safety in order to enjoy other things. And since we're dealing with uncertainties, we use the expected value formula. So the technical term for it is a value of a statistical life, VSL, as opposed to like a philosophical value. So it's not like the worth of the person. The practical use of it is in government policy on new safety measures. So a good example of that is rear cameras in cars. They're now required because their costs have dropped thanks to technology, so it meets the condition. But not all safety laws can be justified by this formula because it's not always applied, like requiring seat belts or additional security measures in airports and airplanes. Those are too much safety with a very high opportunity cost. Another awful example is COVID lockdowns, restrictions, and masks. It was done blindly, without statistical justification, without taking into account its full opportunity cost. What have you done? And if you wonder what is the number, well, it varies a lot from nation to nation, and one estimate is about $10 million. So time to take notes. A lesson on crime would not be complete without talking about FDA, and their victims suffer and die in a way that can't be identified. FDA can make two types of errors: approving a drug by mistake or rejecting it by mistake. And these are statistical terms. So the first one has visible costs, while the second one has hidden costs. The first one can become a big scandal. They're like, what have you done? So they choose to err on the side of caution very rationally. But remember, there is no free lunch. So the catch is type 1 error goes down at the expense of higher type 2 errors. Oh no. You've heard of this proverb, better safe than sorry? Well, this is true only if safety is free, but it's not. Good luck with that. Sometimes being safe means being even more sorry. Then what do? So it's again the fallacy of perfectionism, which doesn't take into account the inevitability of sacrifice. By the way, most of what FDA does is redundant because pharmaceuticals and physicians already have a lot of incentive to not give out harmful drugs, because otherwise they're really screwed because they'll be sued. And the patients have a lot of incentive to do research because it's their life. There's no need for FDA's top-down paternalistic protection. Rational agents pursuing their self-interest will modify their behavior in the light of new circumstances. These two errors are also applicable to court cases. Now, the default assumption in a court is innocent unless proven guilty. So type 1 error is executing someone innocent, and type 2 error is letting free a criminal. Both are mistakes, and there is a trade-off between them. We have to decide which one is a higher priority. This is also why capital punishment tends to be so long and costly to avoid type 1 error. So pause here, record the slide number, and summarize this slide in one sentence using your own words. Congratulations for finishing your first lesson. Here are a bunch of questions which you should be able to answer given what you learned today. So I'm not going to give you the answer to these. You don't need to recopy the questions themselves, so you can just record the question numbers. But you should use some of the concepts and theories in today's lesson to answer them. So if you look at the previous slides and the notes that you took, it should be quite easy where you have to use which one. You're going to have the chance to share your answers with your classmates, which helps your learning. And of course, you have the chance to ask me. So the next time that we meet in class, bring in anything that is not clear to you. So give it a try. If something is not clear, if you're undecided and you're like, oh no, what's going on here? Well, bring it to the class and ask me. You're going to have that opportunity. It's your responsibility to have complete notes and including the answers to these questions. And it's also your responsibility and your right to ask your teacher if something doesn't make sense. So pause here, record the slide number and the question numbers, and look at the concepts that you have and try to write at least a couple of sentences for each question. Let's summarize today's lesson through a concept map. We talked about rationality, which is seeking to maximize utility, and that is done by calculating expected value. Notice that in a concept map, each arrow is effectively a sequence and can be converted to a sentence. So here we say rationality is seeking to maximize utility. So this is a fairly rich way of doing concept maps where you have an arrow with a little description on it. Maximizing utility is done through calculating expected value, right? So as we go through the course, we're going to do more concept maps and you're going to be doing your own. So I want you to get some practice with that. It's an excellent way of digesting the material and putting all of the concepts in a linked fashion. So expected value is, oh, that's so cool. Expected value is by comparing marginal benefit and marginal cost. And marginal cost includes sacrifice. So rationality focuses on positive statements, which is factual stuff. Look at the fact of scarcity. And scarcity means that sacrifice is inevitable. All right. And there is no free lunch because there is going to be a sacrifice. So that's the result of that. All right. So that also proves the fallacy of perfectionism or utopia, which is a form of a normative statement. Okay, so this is one way of summarizing the lesson, and I would emphasize the concept of rationality and expected value in today's lesson. So what I want you to do is pause here and draw your own concept map using these concepts and maybe some other ones. If you haven't ever done concept maps, you can copy mine, but you have to make at least one change. So you can add something like type 1 error, type 2 error. There were some concepts that I didn't cover. I have limited space here, by the way, in a rectangular shape. It's a total mess. Okay, so add something or rearrange things or change the wording. So make sure it is customized to you. Let's go back to our guiding questions. So what I want you to do is, given the lesson today, go back and revise your answers to the 4 questions. So record the slide number here and re-answer the 4 questions in your notes. And in doing so, try to use some of what you learned in today's class. Even if you feel like you're still undecided about some of these, it's okay, because you're still in your learning process, and some of these concepts are things that you're going to see later. But when you come to see me with your notes, I want to see that your notes are complete and to see the progress that you made. So it's okay if your answers aren't perfect. But pause here, record the slide number, and do another attempt at these 4 questions. I'll also show you a sample student answer just to give you an idea. So these are answers which I approve of. I think they're pretty advanced. So for the incentives, you could say that it's a matter of benefit versus the cost, and that the cost of eradicating all crime would be too much. A top-down approach would be more investment in police and jails, or increasing fines and durations of imprisonment. For unintended consequences, it could be less resources for other things, as well as unskilled racial minorities getting the real hit with a cycle of crime and poverty. An alternative for that would be realizing that zero crime rate is not the ideal, and also removing the impediments to education and employment. Because if somebody has the prospects for growth, they have less incentive for crime. Now, when you see this, you're like, oh no, this is so advanced. Yeah, but this is at the test level. So by the time you get to the test, you're gonna be competent enough to operate on this level. This is just to give you an idea. I would say don't copy down these answers. If it gives you an idea, then translate it into your own words. That's how you'll learn, not by copying, but by paraphrasing and putting things into your own words. All right, have a great day.